This is Cris Coffin. I think we will get started because we have a fair bit to get through. Again, I am Cris Coffin with American Farmland Trust. We have a number of us who are joining us for this webinar. We have built it in part to be more conversational and discussion than pure presentation. So this is a little bit of a change for us. And there are a few additional logistics that are a little bit more of a challenge for many of us because probably as many of you are as well, you are at home, your Wi-Fi may not be great. So if there are any challenges, you can't hear us, we can't hear you, feel free to let us know that. So here's the logistics, just the 101. Everyone is muted. Please use the chat feature if you are having technical difficulties, and somebody will be back in touch. We know that there are many of you who are working on things. Many of you land trust folks have resources that you could share. We would love anybody with any resources to put them, a link to them in the chat box or the question box, and we are going to put all those resources in a master resource sheet and send them out to everybody after the webinar. We are going to try and have some discussion. If you want to raise your hand, please do so. There's a little hand feature on your dashboard that shows, raise it if you want to ask a question, and we will then unmute you. If you've muted yourself, be sure to unmute yourself as well. So with that, let's get started and go to the next slide, please. And I should say that I am co-hosting this today with Holly Rippon-Butler with National Young Farmers Coalition. And then we have several others, as you saw, and we will introduce them as we go along. So we recognize that now is a very difficult time for a lot of people, but since the community that those of us on the phone work with are farmers and ranchers, we wanted to focus on that. We wanted to focus both on what is the impact that farmers and ranchers are feeling, what for them are federal and state resources that are available, and what is in the works, at least in terms of Congress, that we're aware about. We want to talk about how land trusts and others of you, some we know that state agencies of agriculture and departments are doing a lot, but particularly for the land trust community, how are you responding in terms of helping and supporting producers in your community and the ones that you work with? And lastly, we are really trying to get a sense of how is this work of agricultural land protection being impacted, both sort of what are you seeing as immediate impacts and what are your concerns about the next 12 to 24 months. So with that, we are going to start with a poll that's just going to give you a chance to say which of these three topics you are most interested in talking about, because we will gauge our we'll gauge the amount of time we give to each accordingly. So let's do people will take a minute to fill out the poll. Okay. Can we show the poll results? Okay, well, I can't. Sorry, I'm trying to So that's good. It looks like we will spend a little bit more time on sort of what impacts farmers and ranchers are facing and ways that land trusts are responding, and how we might think about other ways that we might respond. But we are going to start with at least a little bit of an overview on, actually, we're going to start with a little bit about impacts, and then we're going to go to federal and state resources being provided, back to how land trusts can help, and then on to how land protection work is being impacted. So let's, if we can go to slide 3. And I'm going to turn it over to Holly Rippon-Butler with National Young Farmers.
Thanks, Cris, and hi, everyone. It's really nice to see a lot of names that I recognize in the attendee list, even though I can't see everyone's faces or see anyone in person right now, but really nice to be on this call all together. Thank you for taking the time to join, and thank you, Cris, and the folks at AFT for organizing this webinar with us and getting this conversation started here. So yeah, Cris did a great job framing what we want to talk about today with you all, and I'm just going to get started by sharing a few of the impacts that we're seeing on the ground. For those of you who aren't familiar with Young Farmers Coalition, we're a national grassroots advocacy network. We help farmers and ranchers connect with policy and make sure their voices are heard in DC and in state policy. And we provide services to them through trainings and resources, as well as helping them organize in local chapters. So that's a little bit about us as an organization. And I lead our land access program work, which is the top challenge that young farmers are facing during non-COVID-19 times. So it's already something that is causing a lot of challenge and uncertainty for farmers, but this moment is certainly exacerbating that. So I just wanted to share first some results from a survey that we did with our membership to orient us to some of the impacts that farmers are experiencing. This was something we put out about a month ago, right, as things were sort of starting to really, the impacts were starting to unfold in mid-March, and we kept it open for about three weeks and just tried to get a sense right off the bat, what are farmers experiencing, what is happening. And you know, of course, this comes with the big caveat that things are changing very quickly, and the challenges likewise will change as things unfold, and also that lots of challenges are felt uniquely based on different farm operation styles and where they are in different regions. But we heard from farmers that there was this sense of universal kind of stress and uncertainty. There's certainly some opportunity that's coming out of this moment for some farmers who are able to adapt to the increased interest in local food and increased demand for that. But the overwhelming thing that we heard from about 75% of the respondents was that they saw reduced sales outlets for their products, with restaurants closing overnight, or in some states, farmers markets being shut down, or if they're just not able to make the change from how they typically market their product to the sales outlets that are currently available to them. For instance, we're, I think, hearing that a lot with dairy farmers now having to dump milk, not because of lack of demand, but because of some issues in the supply chain and the ability to transition quickly to the new sales outlets. So farmers, along with that, are experiencing added costs of implementing alternative sales strategies. We have a quote from one of the farmers who responded to the survey, estimating that it would cost them $8,000 to make some changes. And you know, this was even though they were still seeing a way to sell their product through their CSA. And I've heard from another farmer about $3,000. So, you know, it's going to be all over the board, but that's just one voice, one example. Farmers are experiencing loss of off-farm income. A lot of young farmers rely on other jobs besides their farm in the winter. and that suddenly got shut down right around the same time of the year that many of them on the East Coast and in places with more temperate climates that were or more seasonality to the farm year, as they were trying to buy seeds or get started preparing for the upcoming season. They suddenly lost their restaurant job or some other off-farm income. Increased caretaking responsibilities. I think many people across the board are experiencing this if they have kids home from school or other extended family to take care of, and that's true for farmers as well as delayed access to materials. There was a period of time where farmers were having trouble getting access to seeds because there was so much interest from home growers, which is great. We want more people to be growing food, but that was challenging. Also, some disruption to just general supplies, whether it's lumber or if you're trying to implement a building project or things that you might need just to run your business. Sanitation supplies are in short demand for everyone, and that's concerning for farmers who are trying to have on-farm store sales. And so lots of different challenges, but I think we can go to the next slide, and I will share a little bit about what farmers are asking for. Direct financial assistance, policy advocacy, help connecting with consumers, affordable, equitable access to land, as always. I mentioned sanitation supplies. We heard from some farmers asking for translated materials. A lot of the material that is coming out has been in English, and many farm workers in particular speak Spanish or another language, and so lack of access to just understanding what's going on in this moment is tricky. And training, we still need more farmers, and they need to get access to training. And then things like CSAs are very helpful because they provide support in advance for the whole season. As a coalition, we've also been particularly tracking the impacts that this moment is having on farm workers and others on the front line that are not getting the same support and protection in some of the policy that is being passed in Congress right now, and that are experiencing a lot more vulnerability in this moment. And we're supporting other allied organizations that are advocating on behalf of that as well. So I wanted to mention that. We can go to the next slide. Just real quick, this is something that I've been working on, is messaging around what is happening with land and what might be happening, what some of the impacts that might be felt are, and how we can respond. And the key message, as I see it, is that farmers must not lose land as a result of the crisis. We need to continue to protect farmland and keep it in the hands of farmers while addressing inequities of land ownership that are already prevalent, and focus on building resilient local food systems with secure land access at the foundation. I will share the link to a recent blog post that I wrote that goes into a lot more detail about this and some of the impacts on land that might be affecting farmers right now. Next slide. So lastly, I just wanted to quickly share how Young Farmers Coalition is responding. As I said, we did a survey. We're listening to our members. We're calling our members. We are advocating for policy that supports them, and Sanaz will talk a lot more about that in a minute. We're helping them navigate resources. We have a landing page where we've built out a resource library for farmers. We've also created a direct sales software platform guide for farmers to help them make the change. And we're continuing to do the work of organizing and helping farmers connect in their communities. So I will paste a couple of those resources into the chat, and I will turn it over to the next slide, which will be Cris, I believe.
I think that's back to me. This is Cris. And I just want to talk a little bit, just a second, about what American Farmland Trust is doing. I hope that many of you have seen that we created a farmer relief fund. We have been, I think, surprised at how much demand there is for it. We have over 4,000 applications to the fund. We are still raising funds to meet the demand. We are not there to meet 100% of need. We have a ways to go still. We are very hopeful that we can get there. If you have farmers who are in need and wants to apply, you can find the information on our webpage. If you have donors, again, we are pitching it as 100% of funds raised are going in and right out the door to producers. So if you know of people who are looking for something to give in terms of direct support to farmers, that's one way. We are also aware that there are other land trusts, other states who are trying to do similar things as well. We, like everyone else, are trying to raise awareness. You see these two things on the left that are, we are now doing some videos around farming in a pandemic, which is just sort of taking the perspective of farmers, of market managers, how people can be supportive of farmers right now, how they can, what is the situation around farmers markets. So again, like many of you, we're trying to sort of raise awareness. And finally, as I'm going to turn over to Tim Fink, our policy director, we have been very engaged both on Capitol Hill and with USDA on how relief is going to come out the door. And Tim and Sanaz Arjamand, who is the federal policy director for young farmers, are going to tag team this next piece on policy. So next slide, and turning over to Tim, I believe.
Thank you, Cris, and thank you everyone for joining us today and for having Sanaz and I to present. Much appreciated. We'll be covering, as Cris said, the federal policy response to date with a look of what might lie ahead. On March 27th, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act was signed into law. And this goes by many names. You may hear it called by the acronym CARES. It's also known as COVID-3 or Phase 3, since it's the third COVID response package passed by Congress. But the gist is this is $2 trillion in relief and economic stimulus. It's the single largest stimulus bill in American history. Young farmers, American Farmland Trust, and a lot of organizations advocated for the inclusion of agriculture within this bill, particularly on behalf of those local and direct sellers who really lost their market access because of social distancing. And we're pleased to say that the final bill has two specific relief funding pools included within USDA. One is $14 billion to replenish what's called the Commodity Credit Corporation. In case you're not familiar with this, this is that over the past few years, the administration has spent over $20 billion through this instrument in what were called market facilitation program payments, basically designed to offset the loss of income because of trade for various commodities. And it focuses largely on a lot of the big commodities. You'll see this on the list here: corn, soy, cotton, wheat. But it also has a select group of specialty crops that have also been included in this. And really the expectation is that this $14 billion is going to be spent largely similarly to how it has been even before that process of COVID. Now, there was also $9.5 billion in relief for producers impacted by COVID. And they specifically say within the legislation that this includes local market, specialty crop, livestock, and dairy producers. As we speak, USDA is actually working on developing a plan for implementing this funding. The congressional legislation that produced that $9.5 billion pool has almost as much language in the authorizing language as appears on this slide right now. So there really wasn't a lot of guidance from Congress. And what USDA is trying to do is implement funding, in some cases, to groups it hasn't traditionally provided relief funding to, so they're essentially forced to build a program somewhat from scratch. So this is not an easy task for USDA, and look for more information on that. And probably by next week, we'll have more information on USDA is going to administer that funds. In short, for that 9.5, there's going to be a lot of competition for that funding. And I was just looking at some of the requests coming from various commodity groups. Local farmers have asked for $1 billion. Pork has asked for $5 billion. Specialty crops, $5 billion. Dairy has asked for anywhere from $5 to $10 billion. Beef has asked for $13.6 billion, and et cetera. And I say that not because I'm expecting you to take down those numbers, but just to emphasize that the demand for funding is very much exceeding even this $14 billion and the $9.5 billion combined. And that's going to be a major issue as we move forward. I'll turn it over to Sanaz now to say a little bit about the Small Business Administration part of CARES.
Thanks, Tim. Can you hear me okay?
Sound good?
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. This is Sanaz Arjamand with the National Young Farmers Coalition based in DC. I will keep my comments brief and lead with the punchline here because these two programs have now officially run out of money, and recognizing that there's a lot of good information to get to in the rest of the presentation, but just highlighting that there had been some confusion about the Small Business Administration programs and how producers might be able to participate, with the exception of nurseries, aquaponics, and agricultural co-ops. Most ag producers were not, in the end, eligible for the economic injury disaster loans. Those were particularly of interest because there's the promise of a $10,000 grant, or as they called it, an advance that didn't have to be repaid. In theory, in practice, that was implemented really with about $1,000 going to each business, depending on the number of employees they had, as opposed to just that block amount that would have been used for payroll and rent and utilities and other things to keep businesses moving. The Paycheck Protection Program is another new program that came out, and unlike the disaster loans, this is not administered directly by the Small Business Administration, but was intended to be funneled through other credit providers and banks, including farm credit. So farmers were, in theory, again, eligible for this, but because there isn't really a history of those farm credit institutions working with SBA, there was a pretty slow start for getting farmers in the door for that program, and didn't really see high rates of success or uptake there. In addition, that program is really meant to cover employee salaries, so not necessarily as helpful for smaller producers where they might not have a lot of folks on payroll. So we can go to the next slide. So I'll just note briefly that now that money has run dry, there is a need for some sort of interim bill to keep these programs, in theory, moving along. There is some debate that is happening about whether this interim bill will just include more funding for the programs as is, or if there will be other changes. Some of those changes that are being advocated for include changes to SBA programs, including having agricultural producers be eligible, having more funds for state governments to help backfill the deficits that states are feeling at this time, and increasing nutrition assistance benefits. It's a pretty complicated process. Congress isn't in DC. In theory, they'll be back in session May 4th, although that has been pushed back already. So sort of a lot remains up in the air in terms of what this next tranche of relief will look like. And there's a recognition that beyond whatever interim bill happens, there's going to be a need to talk more about recovery and rebuilding the economy, given all of the really intense impacts throughout the system that we've felt because of COVID-19. And I'll just note briefly, we're not going into a ton about state policy here, but one of the resources that Young Farmers has to share is that we've been collecting some state guidance around farmers markets and other reactions to the COVID-19 crisis. So we're happy to share what we've been gathering in terms of state policy resources as well. I will leave it at that. And, oh, actually, I'm sorry, next slide. So as we're looking into phase 4, I've noted a couple of issue areas where we felt like phase 3, the bill that just passed, was lacking, or issue areas where more support is needed to help young farmers keep their businesses going. So I've talked about financial support. Holly mentioned earlier a better support for essential workers in the food chain, including farm workers, maintaining land tenure, and filling the gap for state budgets, as a lot of farmers are dependent on programs that are run by their state departments of agriculture as well. So I will actually leave it there and turn it over back to Tim.
Thanks. So I wanted to say a little bit about some of AFT's thoughts in terms of Phase 4. We're supportive of many of the things that Sanaz mentioned, and also thinking too about you have people who desperately need food right now and farmers who don't have access to those markets. And the more that we can link those two groups together, the better. An example of this is a program that actually began in Massachusetts. There's other examples that are similar across the nation, but Massachusetts Healthy Incentives Program basically is the idea of providing an additional incentive via SNAP that would go towards the direct-to-consumer market, so spend in farmers markets, CSAs, et cetera. Another thing is increasing funding for the local agriculture market program. This would help producers transition their business models. Another thing that we're very concerned about, especially as you see what's going on with the agricultural economy, is providing relief while simultaneously protecting the land. So help producers see agricultural conservation easements as a way of achieving that relief, but also achieving that societal goal of making sure that we have enough farmland for the future. So one concept that we had was what we're calling a debt for working lands program, wherein you could have, if you had an FSA loan, you could actually get relief on that in exchange for a permanent agricultural conservation easement or a long-term covenant. Another example policy is increasing funding for ASEP as another means for providing farmers funding so that they can just reinvest in their operation, but also potentially even create a rapid response buy, protect, sell pool of funding so that land trust could be able to buy that land absent of another agricultural buyer, just to keep that land protected. And then finally, we've been looking at things such as capital gains exclusions if in the event that land is transferred to young, beginning, and other disadvantaged farmers. And basically that would be giving that reduction with a promise from those farmers that they'll keep it in agriculture for at least the next 10 years. And that concludes the federal policy part. We're opening it up, I believe, to questions.
All right, thank you, Tim. This is Cris again. Appreciate that very much. We have one question, and that's really sort of all we have time for. If people have others, please feel free to write them down, and we will try and answer them. This one is from Susan, and I believe, I don't know if it's Kaler or Kohler, but Susan asks, if someone applied to the Paycheck Protection Program or EIDL, and that application was in, are they still being considered, and when will applicants know more? Do we know the answer to that, Tim or Sanaz?
No, that's a good question. I'm afraid I don't have the specifics. I've just read that they are not accepting any more applications as of Thursday, and whether they were able to cut new applications off in time to actually have funds available for all existing applications, I'm not sure. So I can do some more digging and send more information around about that.
Great, that would be helpful. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it back over to Holly, and we're going to talk a little bit about how our land trusts responding, and are actually going to open it up on a poll, and then for discussion of how all of you are, what kinds of things are you doing? So Holly, to you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, we know that land trusts and state agencies and other conservation organizations are critical for the work that you all do is critical for farmers always. And right now, I think it's been really exciting to see some of the ways that land trusts are beginning to respond to this moment, to prioritize the farmers they work with and the land. I've called out just a few folks who may be on this call and maybe could could say more about what they're doing, and we'll have a little time for that later. But I just wanted to call out a few examples that I've seen come through my inbox, and then I also will have Marissa Codey from the Columbia Land Conservancy share a bit about what her organization is doing. So what we've seen, I've seen landing pages with information for landowners, consumers, and farmers. An example of that is from the Columbia Land Conservancy, and Marissa will share that in a minute. We've seen Land Trust sharing resources to help consumers connect with local food. I saw Maine Farmland Trust put up a post 4 ways to support Maine farmers right now, and linked to some examples of maps or directories that are helping people connect with farmers. Columbia Land Conservancy has also done this. They're advocating continuing to stay involved in policy and messaging with their networks around the importance of farmland protection for the food system. This was Maine Farmland Trust again. I saw they organized a happy hour and community book club, which is a way to connect with their network and likely to talk about farmland and farmers as well. PCC Farmland Trust is hosting a webinar on climate change and resilient food systems. So again, just bringing together the different aspects of what farmers need always, but also in this moment, and encouraging landowners to suspend rental payments if they can for farmers. So we can go to the next slide. So that's just a few examples, and I'm also going to share ways that I think other land trusts can help later, but we wanted to pause for a quick poll to get a sense of how your organizations are responding. I also want to encourage people, as you're taking the poll, to write a few things in the chat box if you want to give us some examples or a link to a response that your organization is having. I think we'd all like to see that. And I'm going to just keep us moving in terms of not having anyone jump in and say that right now, but we are aiming to leave room at the end for some more discussion. But send us some examples if you would like. Okay, we'll just give a couple more seconds for folks to vote. Hopefully this doesn't take too long. We've just got it. You can just choose one or more of the following on the list. And okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we'll go on. All right. So great. We'll take a look here. We can see folks are helping connect consumers and farmers, which is great because that is one of the key challenges that farmers mentioned that they're having and that I talked about. Listening to producers, that's great. Advocating for, getting involved in advocacy and trying to figure it out. Yes, great. Well, you are in the right place. We're going to talk more about that right now. What are some other ideas? And I don't know if anyone is having trouble using the chat box, but you can also use the question box as well if the chat doesn't work for you to share some of your own examples. But great, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I will quickly go through. This is a list of things that I've been working on brainstorming in conversations with some of you who are on the call and other partners. Lots of smart people have helped kind of craft this list and think through what are some of the ways, and let's keep building it. But to get started, I just want to say land trusts are already helping. I've said this, that farmland is the foundation of our local food systems, and the work that you're doing to protect land, ensuring farmers have access to it, and particularly working on equitable access through examples like the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust and Minnow, which is a new land trust out in California, and others that are really particularly focusing on that. You're doing a lot already and your work is really important, and keep doing it. And so I just wanted to be sure to say that. And also to say listening to farmers is really important as always. and that connecting to them through conversations and emails and surveys is all great to help inform this work because it'll need to take shape locally. But try not to place huge demand on farmers' time in this moment also, as they're facing a lot of rapid change themselves. So I'll just go through quickly, give you a sense of some of the areas and of ways that you can help. You can go to the next slide. And this is going to be the topic of a second blog post that I'm working on in our series. So I'll have a lot more to say about some of these examples and a place where they're all collected in one place. So I'll go through it real quickly, but there'll be more to come on all of this. I just want to say how I've organized the thinking so far. The first is communicating with your networks, and that includes farmers, but also landowners, donors, and other supporters. And this is where things like encouraging landowners to suspend rent payments might come in, or working with donors to ask them to consider helping make sure that farmers have land security, or that you're able to continue protecting land in a way that supports the local food system. Talking to your network about connecting with local farms and supporting food access efforts. I'll share a few links in the chat box after I'm done talking with examples of some of these things. And specifically supporting farmers of color and encouraging landowners to take action to address land-based injustice and inequities in our food system. I think there's a lot more to say about that, but we all are not going to be able to advance a resilient food system without considering the needs and securities of all farmers, particularly those who have been left out of the opportunities to access land or had land-based injustice really occur to them throughout history and in ongoing ways. So I wanted to mention that, and then we'll go to the next slide. There's the next bucket of ways that I think you can really help farmers right now is through your projects and funding. If you own land as a land trust, you can consider suspending rent payments, identifying opportunities in existing easements to support the changes that farmers are going through right now, and thinking about how in future projects you are making sure to serve the local food system, and maybe if there are changes to the easement that might need to be made that are being highlighted right now in this moment. If you're seeing a farmer struggle through this crisis because of an easement term, that might be something you have to do some outreach on to find out if that's happening. But think about how the easement language could be changed for the future, because unfortunately I think this will not be the last moment of major disruption that we face, especially with climate crisis continuing to be a factor. So let's see, keep going. Last couple of things I'll say, just as organizations, you have lots of resources. Think about how those might be put to use in this moment. And the point I want to make here is just being specific to the needs of farmers in your area, listening to them and getting creative. And the last thing is on the next slide, policy. We need land trusts to be advocates on behalf of farmers and the land. And that is hopefully something everyone understands, and why maybe you're on this webinar, because you understand that we're in this together and we need big structural change as well as on the ground work. So I just want to put a few examples up here of organizations that are working on the ground with farmers. But that is all I want to say, because I want to be able to turn this over to Marissa, who's going to provide an example of what her land trust is doing on the ground, and then want to leave time to get into some of the impacts on land trusts.
Hi, this is Marissa with the Columbia Land Conservancy. I assume you all can hear me, or someone will say something. We are a land trust located about 2 hours north of New York City here in the Hudson Valley. And my presentation is really just to say where we're starting. We have not figured all of this out. I don't know that anybody has. But we have started from the basis of understanding what role do we play in our community, what resources do we have to offer, and how can we use that most effectively in this current time. Our agricultural program, much of it is conducted in collaboration with the Dutchess Land Conservancy, which is just south of us. We're part of a statewide network run by the American Farmland Trust. And so we operate from a basis of partnerships. We have thought about within our community, the amount of constituents that we have. I just listed some. We have a broad network of relationships with farmers, donors, municipal officials, service providers. And so really thinking about what role can we play here to meet the diverse challenges that are happening in our community right now. You can go to the next slide. Well, while she's figuring that out, the next slide is essentially just a picture of a website that there it goes, that we created. Terrence Duval in our office has been diligently working on updating this page probably almost daily. If you look in the bottom right-hand side, you can see that we came up with 4 general kind of topic areas. If you go to the website later, you can click on those. There's drop-down resource in all of those areas. And we purposely designed this page so that non-farmers who are going onto this page to look and see how they can help the farm community will be right there in front of resources for farmers. Someone just told me to talk louder. Okay, for farmers. And if you look at the bottom, what can I do to support local food relief? And so what we really have tried to do here is think beyond ourselves, think outside of our organization, and understand the role that we can really play in connecting other people with each other. And so we are referring people to AFT's relief fund and other relief funds. If you can go to the next page. This is my last page. And really, we have not figured this out. It's pretty tricky for us here in the Hudson Valley. There are lots and lots of resources, and I think the flow of information has been vast over the last couple weeks. We're really trying to play a role in streamlining some of this information the best that we can. I think it's worth noting that many of the farmers in their community don't have access to the resources we all have right now. Not everybody uses the internet. Many of the farmers that we know are really not able to access these web-based programs. And so if that's a matter of talking to the farmers, I was talking to a farmer on the phone this morning who doesn't use the internet. And so kind of really understanding your community and where everybody is, there's pretty wide ranging ability to tap into the resources available right now. And just by way of streamlining, so I noticed in the survey that Holly put up about the farmers of food distribution is being key. One of the links on our website is specific to what we have seen, which is a huge increase in people contacting us wanting to buy local food. And we don't have a single place to list all the local food that's available. On our website, we have probably 6 different lists and maps right now. And so hopefully what we will be able to facilitate is working with partners to bring this information together. I think my last bullet is really worth thinking about probably for many of you is the time and effort that we're all spending right now trying to be helpful. It's worth thinking into the future as to, is this going to be a need that we're going to need in 3 years when hopefully this virus has left our lives? And so for something like combined food distribution network, certainly it is, and keeping in the back of our minds how we can all work together to create systems that that will be beneficial in a more far-reaching way than just this immediate moment. So those are the end of my slides. I don't see any specific questions. We can go on to the next speaker.
Right. So thank you, Marissa. Thank you, Holly. Let me pause for a minute because I do, if people want to raise their hands to offer, if you are and your land trust are doing something that you think that the rest of us should know about, we would welcome you raising your hand and taking a minute to talk about it. I know that you all shouldn't be bashful because I know many of you are doing some great work. So I will hold for 1 minute to see if anybody does want to raise their hand. And if not, we might go on to this next poll because we do, and then maybe we could have people who raise their hands and want to think about this as well in terms of what immediate impacts you're seeing. But I actually do see a raised hand. So I see an M. Cleaver. I am going to unmute you. Whoops, if I can do this right. And if you're muted, unmute yourself, but you should be on to speak. It just says M. Cleaver, so I'm sorry, I don't know your first name.
Thank you. This is Marcy Cleaver. I'm out here in Washington State with the South of the Sound Community Farmland Trust. And my question, searching for some input, is has anyone gone to the local news stations to talk about buying local, where they can buy local, and keeping the dollars in the local community at this time? How did you do it? What kind of success did you have? Any pearls of wisdom?
That is a great question. So let me give it a minute for any other hands to go up if anybody wants to answer that question. Or if they have another question. I know, there have been efforts to talk collectively about what the impact is, but at a local scale, I don't know of particular examples, but I'm sure there are. And if nobody has any ideas, we will invite people to send us any examples that they find, and we can pass that along. So not seeing any other questions at the moment. Let's go on and do this poll around the immediate impacts, and then I hope that people will be willing to raise their hands so that we can have people to expand on what they're seeing as the impacts and how they're addressing them. So here's the next poll. While we're waiting on that poll, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Mary Ellen Miller, whose hand is up. So Mary Ellen, whoops, hopefully I've done this right. Feel free to offer an opinion or perspective or a question.
Sure. I'm calling from Iowa. We're a statewide land trust, fairly young, but we have gotten very aggressive on social media during this pandemic. One of the things we are doing is once a week, we do a live Facebook 30 minutes with one of our farmers, and they do a land walk and talk about what they're doing. One of our first ones was one of the farm wives who taught us how to forage for edible wild foods in the spring, mostly greens. We just did one today where our farm assistant talked about how he conducts land walks with our prospective landowners. We had one where one of our farmers talked about rotational grazing with his livestock and actually just took his camera out into the field as he spoke. So these have been pretty well received. There are some challenges in terms of bandwidth in some of these rural areas that we've struggled with, but we keep moving ahead and doing the best we can. And we've gotten very positive responses. It's a way to keep us connected.
Great, thank you. And tell me what land trust you were with?
Sustainable Iowa Land Trust.
Great,
We're very young. We're in our 5th year.
Right, but that seems like a terrific idea. So
all of those have been archived on our website, silt.org, so you can see them afterwards as well.
Great, thank you so much. So what I am most cheered about in looking at this poll is how few of you say all of the above, which is really great that all of these are not necessarily a challenge, and it's really good to see that it is not that for most of you it is not harder to engage interested landowners, and in fact I am curious about whether there is more interest, particularly in purchased easements at this point in time by folks who are really needing to think about finances and still want to remain in agriculture. So this does seem, this question about funding is a challenge, and I just wanted to share with everybody a comment, and I hope Ellen Griswold with the Maine Farmland Trust doesn't mind me doing that. She posed a question, I don't know if it came to everybody, that was, is it challenging at this point in time? And I think this is a question for all of us to think about, and I would be curious for folks' reaction. So if people want to react by raising their hands and speak, that would be great. Of how hard is it for any of us to be advocating for continued funding for farm and ranch land protection at a time when farmers and ranchers are desperately seeking relief themselves? And I guess my response is this, and I think, and I would welcome Tim or Sanaz to opine on this as well. My sense is that we keep talking about it because we see it as a way for farmers and ranchers, if they are still committed, they want to remain in agriculture, or they want to see their land remain in agriculture, that this is a time where they do need resources. And this is one way of being able to provide those resources. So that's, I think that's how we sort of message around it. Ellen, I would welcome it if you would like to give your perspective, or Tim or Sanaz, would either of you like to speak to that?
I can only echo what Cris just said. This is Tim Fink, that it is an opportunity to actually provide some degree of relief while achieving a public goal. And it's important to note that in addition to providing some relief, depending on how things go within the farm economy, this land will have never been more imperiled than it is as a result of the economic crisis that's ensued.
Yeah, and this is Ellen. I think that's just a challenge that we've been trying to sort of grapple with a little bit, just because, you know, I think there are some farmers, at least within our state, you know, who worry that we're thinking more about the land than the farmers themselves, even though obviously, as you know, you both pointed out, you know, increased funding for farmland protection obviously is much to the benefit of the farmers themselves, and it can provide them with an additional source of compensation. But there are some farmers who don't see it that way, and so that has just been sort of just figuring out the right messaging has been something that we've been thinking about.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's going to be continue to be the case going forward, which does take me that, Kayla, if you can go to the next slide and the next poll. But in the meantime, let me unmute Kathy Orlando with the Sheffield Land Trust in Massachusetts.
Hi, did I successfully unmute myself as well?
You are. We can hear
All
you.
right. Well, it seems to me that one of the things that was said earlier, in that we as organizations have a lot more access to information and resources sometimes, and easier access just because we're always talking with folks than a lot of the farmers who are out in the fields or in the dairy barns or wherever it is. So that I think that this is an ideal time for us to be increasing our advocacy for the farmers, at the same time as reaching out to them to find out how can we be best helping. And maybe part of this is being able to put together a really good set of questions that we can all be using to ask, our farmers, our local farmers, our regional, our state farmers, what is the best way that we can help you? Here are some things we've thought of. Are there others we haven't thought of, or are any of these not helpful? So that we can really do the work that they can't, especially given that this is going into harvest, into the really heavy time of year for people. I mean, dairies all the time. But I think that we have an opportunity to be able to do for them in a way that us helping is going to create a larger impact than every individual farmer having to do it themselves. And so if we can then create places where the farmers can go, like can AFT have a clearinghouse of here's resources that are at a national level, that are at the state level, at a regional level, that we can all get to one places so that all the organizations can then link to that and say to our farmers, okay, you just have to go here, or okay, do you need help in applying for a grant or applying for these programs? We can do that. We'll go print out these programs for you and help you fill that out. But I think if we can all pool all of the information we have so everybody isn't reinventing the wheel of investigating things, we can do a lot more.
That's excellent thinking, and I think that we will. I think that by putting out resources after this call, that's why I think I would encourage all of you to continue to send resources that you are aware of, because we are very happy to put things together. It's been daunting to try and do that nationally, given all of the state different actions taken at the state level, to actions taken at the federal level, and what land trusts are doing. But we certainly could find a way to continue to share more resources if that would be helpful.
That would be great.
Cris, can I just jump in for a sec? This is Holly. Young Farmers Coalition is making a resource library. We started that about a month ago, and I shared the link in the response to your question, Kathy. I don't know if everyone can see it, but I can try to put it in the chat box if that's working for folks. We do have a national resource site where we are continuing to update it as we come across things. And we are also collecting state by state guidance that we mentioned as well that I shared.
Great, and I am seeing that we have in the questions a lot of ideas of what people are doing. So again, we will share these because we don't have time to go through them all. Let's just do this last poll very quickly, and thinking about what concerns people. Okay. And these are obviously not the only concerns. And if there are I'm sure that for many of us, thinking about just the ability of our land trust, especially if it's a smaller land trust, in being able to keep the doors open is a significant concern. So I understand that that's a concern that's not listed here. And I'm sure that concerns as well about the future of farmers in their ability to remain in business is a significant concern. So I don't mean to suggest that these concerns are by any means the only ones. It was just sort of trying to think about specifically whether people are, what the level of concern about funding, because we think that that probably is going to be a significant concern. But let me again open it up for any thoughts, any questions, any ideas of right now of how, for those who are navigating in this uncertain world around doing land protection projects, whether folks have particular suggestions, ideas of how to make it easier. I know that many of you have managed to find ways to get closings done, which is impressive. But if anyone else has other sort of thoughts of ways that we can help navigate in this world of uncertainty around agricultural land protection projects, we'd love to hear it. And if folks, since I don't see any questions, I guess I would turn it back over to Holly to see if you have any last thoughts. I think from American Farmland Trust perspective, we are continuing to work on advocacy both at the federal level and state, where we have state or regional presence. We do suggest that everybody take a look at the Farmer Relief Fund. We will continue to try and post additional resources, and I would welcome any suggestions of how we might do additional programming of challenges and needs from the community. But let me stop and give the last word to Holly.
Well, thanks, Cris, and thanks for everyone joining us. I think I just want to say, repeat what I said earlier, that you all are important to farmers and to the land, and that the work that you do is really important now and always, and that Young Farmers Coalition is here to be a partner in that. We want to help the land trust community connect with farmers and vice versa, and make sure that your work is serving farmers and that you're connected to farmers in the ways that you need to be. So be in touch, and we will keep doing the advocacy work that we're doing, and we're happy to be a resource for that as well. And I will be, putting out some more information through blog posts and continuing to just keep this conversation going. So thanks to everyone who joined, and thanks Cris and other presenters on this call for organizing with us.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Be safe, be well, and we will send resources back out via the registration link. Take care.
Thank you.